For as long as human beings have been telling stories, we've been trying to scare each other. Whether to instill religious adherence or teach a moral lesson, to grapple with the agonies of this life or the mysteries of the next. People love horror. We always have and always will. And while it thrived for millennia in literature, folklore, theater, art, there's no denying that the genre has grown and evolved in ways no one could have predicted, thanks to the introduction of the moving picture. But really quick, before we fully begin, a little bit about me. When I was 5 years old, I saw The Nightmare Before Christmas and have ever since been a devout fan of horror cinema. It is my genuine belief that there is at least one horror movie for every person to enjoy. Yes, even the people who claim they don't like horror movies. Because it isn't all bloodshed and jump scares. It is a diverse and rich genre capable of tackling some of the most pressing and heart-wrenching subjects in countless ways. As I've gotten older, I've grown more and more fascinated by the history of horror cinema. Where it began, how it's evolved, where it's headed. I'm amazed by how horror filmmakers have helped revolutionize film as a technical and artistic medium, and I am equally fascinated by the subtext you can find within the genre. How horror movies often reflect the cultures from which they've spawned, and the anxieties of their age. How they often challenge social norms and prejudices, and make bold political statements. The truth is, horror is so often a genre helmed by out-of-the-box thinkers and outcasts, by marginalized people and our allies, people like me, and maybe you. So, all of that said, I'm going to be embarking on a long and varied project in which I will be exploring and reviewing horror films year by year, both popular and obscure, incredible and incredibly bad, starting at the very beginning. But where is that exactly? Well, Marie-Georges Jean Méliès, better known as Georges Méliès, was born on December 8, 1861, in Paris, France, to the French shoemaker Jean-Louis Méliès and his Dutch wife Johanna. The youngest of three boys, Georges grew up in affluence due to the success of his father's boot factory, and he was afforded a good education. Though he was a smart boy, he was often chastised by his instructors for daydreaming and sketching all over his textbooks. Authority figures disregarding his creative expression would be, in many ways, a running theme of George's life. Still, despite this, he persisted. By 10 years old, he was making puppets out of cardboard. By his teen years, complex marionettes. Once he had finished his formal education, Georges worked alongside his brothers in the family business for a time, before completing his mandatory military service. When he returned from service, his father sent him to London to practice his English and work as a clerk under a family friend. While there, Georges visited the Egyptian Hall. The Egyptian Hall was an exhibition hall run by the British illusionist John Neville Maskelyne. Initially established to hold art and relics, it had evolved to host lectures and entertainment, including magic shows. It was there that Georges became enraptured by stage magic. Sadly, life would get in the way of Georges' creativity. After returning to Paris, he informed his father he wanted to study art, a pursuit that his father immediately refused to fund, believing a career in the arts was a career wasted. Instead, Georges was forced to work as a supervisor for the machinery in his father's factory, an unrewarding job that he hated. Unwilling to abandon creative pursuits entirely, though, he used his off time to study stage magic under Émile Voussaint and attend performances by Jean-Eugène Robert Houdin at Théâtre Robert Houdin. When his father finally retired, Georges sold his share in the factory to his brothers and used the profits, along with a large dowry from his new wife Eugenie, to purchase and renovate the Théâtre Robert Houdin. It was there that he would spend 9 years perfecting 30 illusions, and there that he would meet Jeanne d'Arcy, one of the first actresses to jump from stage to screen, as well as his future mistress. As his stage magic improved, Georges became a well-respected illusionist and member of the Parisian social scene. So much so that he was invited to attend a private showcase for the Lumiere brothers' new cinematograph, which was an early kind of projector. He was so amazed by what he saw that he offered the brothers 10,000 francs on the spot for the machine, an offer that they actually declined. Undeterred, Georges returned to London, where he purchased Robert W. Paul's animatograph film projector, which he then reverse engineered into a camera before graduating to more sophisticated devices. Then, in May of 1896, Georges Méliès shot his first film. He taught himself to develop and print film negatives, created a number of sets and costumes, and built a studio on his property outside of Paris before founding the Star Film Company. In 1896 alone, he made 78 films, covering a huge swath of genres, from war films and dramas to comedies and fairy tales. Through trial and error and sheer creativity, he became a pioneer, inventing and perfecting a number of camera and editing tricks that are now essential to filmmaking. He discovered double exposure, a technique in which a single piece of film is exposed multiple times when the shutter opens, resulting in the overlaying of images on top of one another. This can create a variety of illusions, such as ghostly apparitions or combined objects. He also experimented with time-lapse photography, hand-colored several films frame by frame, perfected the substitution splice, and played heavily with perspective. As time went on, Georges tackled increasingly complex films, and much of his work saw considerable success. His movies, often called trick films, played across Europe and America. His most famous work, the awe-inspiring science fiction film A Trip to the Moon, was released in 1902 and made him an international sensation. Between 1896 and 1913, Georges directed and edited over 500 films, many of which he also starred in and choreographed. Sadly, a series of poor decisions and tragic events would bring an end to his groundbreaking career. His brother Gaston ultimately wasted $50,000 worth of the Star Film Company's money. Shortly thereafter, Georges entered into a deal with the producer Georges Méliès, giving him distribution and editing rights to all of his films, as well as the deed to his home and studio, in exchange for funding. Though Georges' projects grew more ambitious, their budgets inflating, their success declined. Frustrated, Georges backed out of his agreement with Méliès, despite not having enough money to break the deal. Before Méliès could seize his home, World War I broke out, and Georges' wife, Eugenie, died. Devastated and bankrupt, Georges fled Paris with his 2 children. In his absence, the French military turned his studio into a hospital for wounded soldiers, and seized over 400 of his film's original prints, melting them down for silver and celluloid. Even once the war ended, things did not improve for Georges. In 1923, Méliès finally seized his home and studio to cover his debts. In a rage, Georges set fire to his studio, destroying the film negatives stored there along with most of his sets and costumes. In the wake of all of this tribulation, many films were lost. Georges' fame faded, and he was forgotten. He married Jeanne, and the pair lived in poverty for years, barely scraping together a living by operating a toy and candy stand in Paris. It wasn't until the film industry began to recover after the war that filmmakers began to seek out the man who had laid the groundwork for cinema. Journalists interviewed Georges, a memoir was commissioned, and filmmakers threw a gala to celebrate his work. He was even given a National Order of the Legion of Honor. Frustratingly, despite all of the pageantry and accolades, Georges remained in poverty until 1932, when the Cinema Society managed to secure a place for him, his wife, and his granddaughter to live. On January 21st, 1938, Georges died of cancer at the age of 76. Prior to his death, he had drawn a champagne bottle with a popped cork and told his friends, "Laugh, my friends, laugh with me, laugh for me, because I dream for you." It might be about now that you're thinking, that's great, but I clicked on this video to hear a horror movie review, not to learn about a dead Frenchman. Which I get, but please, give me a second. The exploration of film in general is a cumulative one. To fully understand horror cinema, I believe one must look at how it began, and it all began with Georges Méliès. He didn't just lay the foundation for film as a medium and pioneer special effects. He also directed the first horror film. Le Manoir du Diable, released as The Haunted Castle in English, is a French horror comedy film written, directed, and edited by Georges Méliès. It was filmed in 1896. That's right, at the time of this recording in 2025, the first horror film ever made is 129 years old. Coming in with a runtime of 3 minutes and 13 seconds, it is a silent film that I would rate as appropriate for all audiences. And while I would love to tell you who it stars, I am afraid that part's not so simple. You see, in this time period, film actors were often not credited at all. We do know that the woman who comes out of the cauldron was Jeanne Dulcie, and it is speculated that the devil was played by Jules Eugene Legris, a magician who often performed at Georges' theater and appeared in some of his other films. But beyond that, we don't know much of anything. Most details about the making of this film are similarly obscure. We know it was filmed in the garden behind Georges' house using painted scenery, and that it was released by Star Film Company in 1896, or the beginning of 1897. But beyond that, it's all a mystery. We have no idea where it played or how it was received, though its production was likely impactful for Georges himself, who was only a few months into his career. What we do know about the Haunted Castle is that for many years, it was considered lost media, a term used for any media that is believed to no longer exist in any format. Then something kind of incredible happened. A surviving print was purchased in a junk shop in New Zealand sometime in the 1930s or 40s. It was eventually identified in 1985 by a film archivist working for the New Zealand Film Archive. This to me is pretty astounding. How did it end up in New Zealand? What did its buyer do with it for 40 plus years? And what are the odds it would one day be identified? Just insane. As with many early trick films, narrative is secondary to spectacle, but I'll try to summarize what little story there is. The Haunted Castle takes place in a castle or mansion that is occupied by a devil. Whether this is Satan himself or just an embodiment of evil is unclear, but either way, he's a bit of a scamp. He transforms from a bat, summons an imp, and conjures a woman, who he then just sort of puts in a closet. Two cavaliers show up and they seem impressed with the location until the imp starts jabbing them with his pitchfork, driving one to flee. The other sticks around to do something. I'm not really sure. He seems pretty keen on sitting on a bench, but unfortunately for him, Méliès left himself some vanishing furniture, and oh god, now there's a skeleton. The devil shows up and the cavalier is tormented, attacked by ghosts, then introduced to the woman who turns into a witch. Have no fear, though. Good triumphs. The cavalier holds a cross over the cowering devil, and the film ends. You can kind of see what I mean when I say that there isn't really a strong plot. This is a vehicle for special effects and gags, and that's okay. It made me giggle quite a bit over 100 years later, which I think counts as a success. The performances are very fun, very stage comedy-esque. At this time, without the aid of sound, actors had to rely entirely on exaggerated physicality to convey their characters' emotions, a style of acting that would thrive throughout the silent film era. The real star of this show, beyond some good goofs, are the editing, special effects, and props. Substitution splicing, smoke, movable props, they all come together to make something that is, quite frankly, really impressive for its age. I marvel at how this little horror film came to be in a time when the technology was so new and everything was an experiment. If I had been a little French lady in the 1890s, I think I would have lost my mind over this. I am going to give The Haunted Castle a 4 out of 5. I would recommend it for people who are interested in early film history and special effects, who enjoy silent films, or who just like really silly, very plot-light slapstick. Now, most of my reviews won't go into the life of the director like this, but I felt that Georges Méliès just isn't as recognized as he should be in modern horror circles, which is such a shame because, as I will cover in later videos, he contributed a lot to the genre. I encourage everyone to look into his broader work. He was not a perfect man. He liked himself some blackface, just as a warning, but he was so talented and innovative. I recommend the book Georges Méliès by Elizabeth Ezra, as well as Magnificent Méliès, the authorized biography by his granddaughter Madeline. who was incredible in her own right. Just as an aside, she became a film historian before such a field of study even really existed, preserved film during the Nazi occupation, and spent decades tracking down and compiling the works of her grandfather. Finally, I'd also like to give a shout out to the YouTube channel Iconauta, I believe it's pronounced, for having uploaded so much of Georges' work to YouTube. You are amazing. You can find me on Blue Sky at Under the Fleapit, and if you like what I do and want to support me, my Ko-fi is linked in the description. Thank you so much for watching. I am going to be exploring more horror films from the 1890s in my upcoming video, so keep an eye out for that. Feel free to like and subscribe if you would like. And until next time, this has been Under the Fleapit. Stay spooky!